Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of UCalgary's webinar series. I'm Deborah Yedlin, University of Calgary Chancellor, and I'll be your co-moderator today. If you've participated in one of our previous webinars, welcome back. And to all our new viewers, thanks for joining us. We began this webinar series last spring. It's hard to think that it's almost a year ago when our battle against the spread of COVID-19 began. The series started as a way to inform and support our community members by connecting them with UCalgary's COVID-related research and resources. Since then, we've expanded our focus to include a wider variety of topics, but our purpose is still the same: to share and discuss knowledge and insights from UCalgary experts within our community and with our community. This is the fourth webinar in UCalgary's five-part series, Pluralism and Global Citizenship, which explores how we can recognize, respect, and value difference in our local and global communities. Pluralism shows us the benefits of seeking to understand and appreciate the knowledge and experiences of others. Embracing pluralism strengthens our ability to take on the challenges that face us and helps us to prosper in new ways. Today, we're discussing pluralism as it relates to the balance between truth and civility online, and how we can use humor and storytelling to find common ground in the often polarized digital realm. Open, inclusive discussion plays a critical role in achieving true pluralism, and people would say it's also very important in maintaining our democracy. Please join this conversation throughout the webinar by submitting your questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. After a fireside chat with our guests, we'll open the floor to your questions. A recording of today's webinar will be available, and we'll email you a link as soon as it's online. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're recording this webinar on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Moderating with me today is Dr. Alim Barwani, physician, clinical associate professor, and director of public policy and partnerships for the Indigenous, Local, and Global Health Office in the Cummings School of Medicine and O'Brien Institute for Public Health. Welcome, Alim.
Thank you, Deborah, and welcome to all of you, including members and friends of our promoting partners, the Aga Khan University, the Calgary Consular Corps, the British High Commission, the Public Policy Forum, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, as well as the faculties, centers, and institutes within the University of Calgary, especially the Faculty of Arts and the Cummings School of Medicine. Our presenting partner is the Global Center for Pluralism. Follow them on Twitter at Global Pluralism. Today we are talking about trust and civility. Markets, governments, nonprofits, universities, hospitals, civilization's bedrock. But what happens if a vendor doesn't trust the paper or plastic with which it's being paid? If a consumer doesn't trust a product as authentic? If predators penetrate services to the vulnerable? If patients are oversold, mistreated, or underassessed? If data is fudged, ideas lifted, or improperly credited? If we don't steward public resources wisely and ambitiously? Without trust, our bedrock erodes. Institutions become perversions of their otherwise best selves. Trust is civilization's atomic root. But who stands up for truth? We aren't each verifying primary sources on everything we hear. We rely on testimony and interpretation from others, which means our perception of truth doesn't just come from data, but from people who present to us. And the more likable, active, relatable they are, the more believable. However, social media algorithms reward angry, sarcastic, call-out culture that erode the seed of trust, deepening gaps among us, which puts online civility promoters and truth advocates in a painful battle, with simultaneously one foot on the gas and the other on the brake. So what is the path forward, and what role do creativity and humor have in walking that tightrope? Joining us is myth-busting, Netflix-starring legal scholar Tim Caulfield from U of A, and TV star, comedian, and community builder Andrew Phung, our own UCalgary alum. First, a fireside chat, then the last half hour is all audience questions moderated by our Chancellor Yedlin. Andrew, let's start with getting to know you. Tell us how you got your start in comedy.
I was 16 and I joined the Loose Moose Theater Company. I was in high school and they brought in like an instructor for the week to do an improv curriculum with the kids. And we loved it. And our teacher was like, if you go down to Loose Moose, you can take classes for free. You just got to volunteer. And we started going down and volunteering and taking classes for free. And I did improv when I was at the U of C. At nights on weekends, I would go down to Loose Moose while I was getting a degree in economics. And it was like the best of both worlds, because I was getting an education and then also getting a different type of education on stage. And then, I just keep hustling that career. One thing led to another, and it became my full-time job.
That's amazing. And you also, after you finished school and you were doing the improv and you were sort of building those skills, you also had a day job at Youth Central. Why that particular job?
So I got involved in the nonprofit sector because while I was doing improv and while I was at the UFC, I was working at the Village Square Leisure Center as like their youth coordinator, and I was running programming there, and I had an interest in it, and more so because I was interested in making my community better. It's just like I just really enjoyed doing it. I really enjoyed like connecting young people to programs and like uncovering their interests. And it's because like one of my interests was so prominent in my life because of a teacher. And so running an organization like that made me really, really happy. And honestly, it's one of those things where like if I didn't go into acting full time and it was still like my side hustle, I would probably still be doing work in the community. And so to quote my executive director, Penny Hume, I wanted to leave my community a better place than when I had inherited it. And so whatever I do, I try to make my community a better place.
And did you find your improv skills helped with not papering over disagreements, but actually creating a space for exploration?
I think my improv skills and what I've learned through improvisation have helped me in every aspect of my life. It's simple as like looking for directions. It's helped me with that. It's just like helped me just be willing to fail and to make mistakes and to be curious and to always have big ears and to try to always listen to my partners, and that's anyone around me. And so I think it's been a huge detriment to everything I've done. And I kind of use it in everything I do now. And I, I'm a dad and I got a son downstairs doing virtual learning. And it's been a huge part of that world as well. So it's just adapting on the fly. And we're all kind of doing it right now. So whenever people are like, oh, I can't do improv, I'm like, you are living through a pandemic. You improvise every single day. Like every day is like a props not game where you're trying to figure out how do I turn my 1-bedroom condo into an office space. Like you're doing it every single day, and I think we're seeing it totally right now.
That's incredible. Tim, you've committed your life to truth. Why this battle, and how's it going?
How's it going? I love Andrew's improv comment. Yes, and I'm struggling. I'm struggling. It's a grind. I've never seen anything like this. You're right. I've been studying misinformation for decades, and this past few years, and to be honest with you, not just this year, but I'd say the last couple of years have really been extraordinary. But personally, I got into it because I've always been a science geek. I've always been passionate about that. And the other thing, like Andrew, I had amazing teachers. I had amazing teachers in high school. I had one particular social teacher that really opened my eyes to, how exciting learning can be. But probably more importantly to the career I have, I lucked out into two incredible, or three or four actually, incredible mentors. Justice Ellen Bacard, she was on the Court of Appeal of Alberta, just an incredible woman who really taught me that you can shape a career around your passions. And the other one is Professor Bartha Knoppers. Same deal. But for those people, I think I would have had a much more traditional academic career, a legal scholar career. Publishing in law review articles and teaching. And these two people and others, Gerald Robertson's another one, really say, hey, you can do what you want. But I'll tell you something. We live in the era of misinformation, as you said in your intro. I mean, it really is incredible. And so I think another thing that drives me is a recognition of the real, tangible, measurable harm that misinformation is having, not just in the context of health, which is where, I do a lot of my research, but on our liberal democracies. It is really one of the challenges of our times, and the discussion we're having today, how we should respond to it, not just from a policy perspective, but as citizens.
And I think I want to bring up a conversation you and I had in Banff about a year ago, pre-pandemic. And we chatted about how snarky online personas cut through social media noise, but that's not who you are in real life. And you told me, I remember you said, it keeps me up at night. Can you tell me a little bit about this inner conflict?
Yeah, it is a real conflict because, and since our discussion, you'll be happy to hear, I've found a degree of resolution, around that. But it is an incredibly fascinating question. And to what degree do you want to be snarky? To what degree do you want to have some extreme polarizing comments just in order to cut through the noise? And unfortunately, some evidence tells us, I think this, that unfortunately it works. There's really interesting research that talks about the negativity bias, that where headlines outperform, negative headlines outperform positive ones. And I have colleagues, some of them are incredibly respected, and I think that, just wonderful colleagues that are quite snarky online, and it really does work for them. The problem, I think, is that for most people, it really just becomes a tool of polarization, and it becomes a tool that invites an erosion of public trust in all of the voices, not just your voice, but in all of the voices, and it creates this combative environment. And we can come back in a bit to what the evidence actually says about what kind of messaging works, and does being nice work? Does humor work? Spoiler on that one, yes. But I think that I've come to some resolution to, and then I'll come back to that in a bit.
Let's do that now, actually. So, what is the role for humor? Does it allow us to give and receive truth better? Paint that evidence picture for us.
Okay, it is fascinating. I wish I could tell you and everyone that the evidence was clear. That you always should be nice, and you should always speak in measured tones. but unfortunately, the evidence doesn't say that. It's more complicated than that. In fact, there's some literature, some quite recent, that suggests that with respect to fighting misinformation, that what's most important is the content and the shareability of that content, and that tone doesn't matter so much. There is other research that talks about how being nice and being authentic does matter, and I personally lean in that direction. And I think if you want to have an ongoing conversation with your audience, which I think we all want to have, and I think is actually becoming increasingly important, you need to be respectful. You need to listen, and that you need to be empathetic, right? You need to have a degree of you have to be humble, and you have to be empathetic. So I think that the evidence tells us long term that matters. But having said that, as I said earlier, there is this body of evidence about negativity, and so this is a tough battle because we're all hardwired. Some people think, evolutionarily so, to react more to negative news, and that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, right? You want to remember the bad stuff, but I think we can counter that with creativity, with humor. Thank you, Andrew. With storytelling, with narratives, and the good news, and I think this is really good news, coming out of this pandemic, I think we're learning more about how valuable those strategies are. I think you're seeing more institutions understanding how important those strategies are and resourcing them, and you're seeing more clinicians, academics, just people in the public who are interested in science policy, teachers, becoming part of the broader conversation. So my hope is that going forward, that's going to win the day.
That's a perfect bridge to Andrew. Let's get you in here. So you live on stage, you live on screen, you bring a real world perspective. I want you to respond to what you're hearing, and perhaps if you might want to sort of also tell us about this 2018 story of the police officer who made a racist comment on your way to a Jays game. Tell us what you did, and did you use humor? Enliven us with that example.
Well, it's been interesting just like hearing Tim talk and like the dialogue, because like Tim, you got so much research and you read these papers. You've been published over 300 times, and it's incredible. So I learned so much out of it, and everything I have is like anecdotal and just personal, right? And you're bringing up something that happened in 2018, which was a very public thing, and it was like the first time in my life where something had gone so big. And essentially, what happened was I'm on my way to a Jays game, and police officer, there's a car stuck in the intersection. If you've been in Toronto, that lakeshore is just terrible. And so there's a car stuck in the intersection, and this police officer was dealing with them, and then made a racist comment on the way back. And I was like, whoa, that's not cool. And the anger in the moment, I tweeted something about the police officer making this comment and how unnecessary it was. And this is not the Canada I know. And it exploded. And at first, there's this wave of positivity. There's this wave of people being like, we agree with Andrew. This is not my Canada. This is not how it should be. And then a few people in particular, one from Alberta, called me out and called me a virtue signaler, which then opened up the floodgates of negativity. And that actually messed with my mental health, like big time. And it kind of crushed me for a while because people were just saying I was lying. And they called me a liar. I was making it up. I was looking for fame. I think one comment was, how could the Toronto Police Department be racist? They have the most diversity, which I don't think they truly understand. The statement doesn't make sense. And then I kind of just shut away from it. I closed the door, and it actually made me really evaluate how much I'm willing to put myself out there to have these conversations. So Tim, you're out there all the time having these conversations. You're doing it. I don't know how you do it. I come and go. Like when something really gets at me, when I feel like there's big and misinformation, or there's a topic in our society that's bothering us, I pop in, I drop something, and I get out. And the wild thing from that incident was that 6 months later, there was a full investigation that was made. And 6 months later, the detective handling the investigation emailed me, and he said, your claims have been substantiated. The officer has been punished. And I sat there in that moment. I was like, yeah, I didn't lie. I was telling the truth. And I stopped and I was like, oh, that whole online experience made me question whether or not I should have even said something. And I think it taught me so much about social media. And to go back to the original purpose of this conversation, I'm the type of person that's saying that we can't always have those conversations. We can't have civil conversations. Like, it's not always possible. It takes ideal circumstances. And that's one where it was not going to be possible because I was already labeled a liar to these people because of this idea that I called out racism. I was considered a liar immediately. They denied the idea that racism exists in Canada. So because of that bias, because of that thinking, and the inability to listen, as Tim said, I could not have a conversation with them. So it's one of those times that really messed with me. So now when I do speak up, I try to get in and out, and it's usually with a joke. So that's where I stand now.
And I want to connect that to the thread of that story to something about a couple of weeks ago when you were on with Ryan Jesperson, and you said, you don't want any order of government to fail, even if you disagree with that government. And I think it's interesting because you're sort of giving a degree of sort of trust and respect that, in a sense, I don't know that you felt you got when you made that tweet in 2018. So can you comment a little bit on that statement and the intention behind it?
Yeah, and I think it's something like I'm trying to observe, and I'm just trying to like figure out the system. And something I've noticed is that whatever side of the spectrum you are on, whatever you label yourself, there's this thing where like we make others to be the enemy, And so we look at Alberta. The Alberta has the UCP as a government. They are not the government I voted for, but they're the government that many voted for. And so I think for me, when they came into power, I was like, all right, let's see what they do, right? They got the keys of the car. Let's see what happens. And something that really bothered me about the previous government was that I felt like the same care, duty of care wasn't given to that government. So I feel like just like, you know, and it's going to be the case with every government that comes in. There's people who said, that's not my government, I'm not going to give them a chance. Well, we really should be giving them a chance, because if the government coming in, or whatever government we have, if they're saying we want the best for our people, we want to do the best things, we want to do the best thing for our economy, our healthcare, our education, all those things should unite us. You know, when I disagree with someone, I said, if you and I sat down for a drink, we'd probably agree on like 99% of things. We want the same things, but we shouldn't let the one thing divide us. So I don't want any level of government to in Canada to fail. I want them to succeed. If their goal is to make the lives of its citizens better, I want them to succeed, right? But what we're seeing in Alberta, and why I pop in, is it's not always the case right now, you know, and there's a lot of pushback. And so yeah, I carry it with me. I want people to succeed. I want them to do their best. And one thing that did bother me was Doug Schweitzer had commented something about, he said something about liberals, something about the left side. And I responded back. I'm like, hey man, you represent all of us, like regardless of whether or not they voted for you. You won. You can keep saying you win, I win, you voted for me. Well, you won. You now have to represent us whether or not they voted for you. And so yeah, man, I don't want anyone to fail. I want them to succeed. I want Alberta to succeed.
And I think, Tim, I want to come to your book. And in your book, you talk about different behaviors that might promote pluralism, citizenship behaviors. And I want to kind of do a rapid fire with you. So,
okay.
Are you ready? Are you ready?
I'm buckling up. Let's go.
All right. So answer and rationale. Should kids walk to school?
Yes. And it's a really good example of how information can become twisted. You know, on the one hand, you have this fear, and the evidence tells us the number one reason parents don't let their kids walk to school is stranger danger, even though the chance of that happening is so vanishingly rare. We're talking 1 in 14 million. That's like not going to happen, versus exercise, socialization, a little bit of independence, maybe just some quiet time for the kid. Let your kid walk. Look, everyone's got complex lives. They make decisions for a whole bunch of reasons. Just don't let that fear-mongering drive your decision. I understand it's a complex decision, but don't do it because of that fear-mongering. And it's a really good example of how misinformation can be subtle.
And how does it drive like better relationships? Like, because I think that's sort of a key reason why I think you're a proponent of kids walking to school.
Yeah, I am a proponent of kids walking. Look, as I said, look, some people live 40 kilometers away, and some parents are so busy and the school's on the way to work. Totally get it. I'm just talking about in general, right? In the aggregate, the default should be let your kid walk to school if you can do it, and don't let the noise distract you. And one thing that's very interesting is research also tells us something called the cohort effect drives a lot of these decisions. So what's the cohort effect is once one parent drives their kid, the other one does, and then it becomes the social norm. And if you don't drive your kid to school, you're viewed as being a bad parent. Hey, I've got 4 kids. You know, I could totally relate to that kind of peer pressure. But it's a good example of how social media, social comparison, cohort effects can have an impact on our decision making. And the other interesting thing, Aleem, is it's this tension between our intention, because we all want what's best for our kids, right? We all want that, and what the evidence actually says about what's best.
Should we write thank you letters?
Yes. So this one I can't be as emphatic because there's not a whole bunch of research on this, and it's hard to study this well. So you have this body of qualitative research, but it's a good example of how being nice can have a great impact. It has an impact on you, the receiver of the thank you note, of course, and also the writer. And it's really interesting. It's a really subtle little thing you can do. And can I tell you a really quick, sweet story? So people have been reading my book, and when they get to that section of the book, they send me a thank you. Oh my God, I get a little bit misty just telling you guys that. So,
Tim, what's the weirdest thank you card or gift you've ever been given?
So I love M&Ms, and in my first book, so people send me M&Ms with weird things on it, and I won't say what. Okay, I won't say what. So they're in that drawer right over there. So yeah, Andrew, they've gotten pretty weird. I've gotten a jade vagina egg as a thank you. And those who
Oh.
know my Gwyneth Paltrow work will be familiar with, I didn't know where to put it, Andrew. Over to you.
Oh, I got someone gifted me a penis shaped candle this summer while we were filming Kim's Convenience. Like, we were filming on the Danforth, and it was public, and people were like, "Oh!" And someone like ran over and gave us a penis shaped candle. I didn't know what to do with
symbolic
it.
reason behind that? Do you know who gave me the jade egg? The Mayo Clinic. How's that for a little bit of prestige with my jade egg?
I don't think there was symbolism. I don't know. I have no idea. I think it was like it was a gift to stand out. But I'm always curious of what people get.
Love it.
Is venting therapeutic or destructive?
Okay, not a good idea to vent. And Andrew, this is for you. This is for you. A defining moment in your career. Yeah, there's actually really interesting reason. Aleem, I'm fascinated by this topic because there is this really interesting, rich history around the concept of venting, this concept of catharsis, right? This idea that letting it out is good for you. It was before Freud that existed, but really Freud gave it legs, right? And sort of injected it into pop culture. And one of the reasons I find it fascinating is there's no evidence to support the idea of venting or catharsis now. And there never has been, right? There never has been evidence to support the idea that it's a good idea. And of course, there can be not only psychological consequences. So it's actually like pouring gasoline on the fire. That's what most of the psychological research says. Venting, it just makes it worse for you, not better. And also, as Andrew kind of pointed out, it can have other consequences. But Andrew, you talked about you're virtue signaling. Good. That's exactly what a celebrity like you should do. I mean, that's how you can have, normalizing speaking out against injustice. I like that kind of virtue signaling. So yeah, I think that you have to weigh all of the factors, but in general, don't vent.
Do family meals reduce aggression in kids?
So I'm going to say yes. I'm going to put this in the same category as the thank you letter because the evidence is again qualitative, hard to study well, correlation causation problems. But I love family dinners. I think they're such a great part of being a human being that I'm going to say yes. And there are a lot of really interesting programs. There's a great one at Harvard that really supports this, and they believe strongly that it does. It creates connection. It creates, it improves the kinds of food that you eat. So I think if you look at the body of evidence, it's all signaling in the direction that it's a good idea.
And last question before we sign over to Chancellor Yedlin to take audience Q&A. And so for both of you, what role do cell phones play when interacting with someone who is different from you? And if we're spending more time watching videos as opposed to reading, what impact does that have on where content needs to come from in order to promote pluralism and citizenship behaviors in general?
Angie, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, because Aleem uses really big words, and so I got to process the question first.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the social media. So there is interesting research that tells us, and again, got to be careful to overinterpret this stuff, correlation, causation, but that people who get their information from social media and online are more likely to be misinformed and to believe misinformation. Again, have to be careful not to overinterpret it, but they've looked at this from various directions using different kind of methods. And again, I think the body of evidence says that. So that's a warning sign right there, right, Aleem, that you want to be able to get your information from another place. Secondly, social media, a chaotic information environment. Some evidence that's not great. It's associated with mental health stress. And the other thing with reading, and I'm a hardcore reader, so massive confirmation bias here. I love reading. So I might be looking for data to support this, but I think it invites us to slow down and concentrate on one thing, right? To get immersed in one thing. Your book isn't pinging at you, right? Hopefully you're reading a real book or at least a Kindle. It allows you to get it immersed in a concept and get that idea of flow. I don't know if you've heard that. That I think that matters, and I think there is some evidence to back up its value.
Oh, I have no research. I have only anecdotal stuff. But I was in Calgary over the summer, and I was at my parents' house, and they had kept my old WWF magazines, and I brought them home, and I just laid in bed and read them, and it was amazing. So I'm rediscovering reading, which is really nice. And you're commenting about the pinging is so true, because even right now, my group thread of my basketball friends is watching this, and they're texting, and it's just going off right now. And I'm like, whoa, the whole time. And so I've always thought like the phones and our devices are like, it's so bad. Like, it's so bad. And and I noticed about a year ago, my wife and I, that we weren't having the family dinners the way we wanted to. So now we have put away devices at family dinner. We all sit down and we eat and we talk, and it's been great. And like both my sons are so much like, they share so much. We have conversations. And what I loved is like, they have a bond now. Like they do this thing now where one of them will say but, and the other one will like also say but, and it just become this whole thing. And I have to be like, guys, we're not saying the word but at the dinner table. I know people have their feelings on that word, but that in itself has become this family activity of just like, we are having these like moments as a family now, as opposed to doing this the whole time. So in regards to meeting people, like if you're saying the research is like, we're being misinformed online, I don't know. That's true. I assume that's true. I dislike my addiction to my phone so much, and I love talking to people. I love talking to my neighbors. Like I can go and talk to my neighbors like on the street, any stranger on the street, and talk to them for an hour, and I miss that, and I love that. And so I think so much of how I was raised was having conversations with people. And then when I was on stage, it was having conversations with audience members and trying to incorporate their stories into my storytelling. And so I think that's something I love. So, one thing about content, media content, what I love right now is that we're seeing stories being told in our media, in our television shows, in our short form and long form, that 5 years ago we couldn't have even predicted. And so obvious plug, but if you go on like CBC Gem, the projects that are coming out right now are fantastic, and they're new points of view. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited that, like my show Kim's Convenience, but also like other projects have proven that when you tell these stories from these new voices, people will watch and people will listen. And so it gives me a lot of hope in the future of our storytelling. Was I on mute the whole time? Was I on mute?
No,
oh
no.
Yeah.
That's my biggest fear. Like I just said all those words and y'all were like, oh, this guy's on mute. Also, my son's virtual learning is like 90% of the time some kids saying you're on mute. It's hilarious.
Aleem, I will say this though about what Andrew said. I made it sound like I was coming off like a Luddite. That you've got to go back to paper. We can't do that either. People condemned the printing press, and then people condemned comic books, and people condemned movies, and then TVs, and then the internet, and now they're not going away. We have to adapt, and they do create incredible opportunities for building communities, for reaching out, for communicating, and for artistic expression. So it really is teasing out the good from the bad.
Okay, well, there are lots of great questions that have come in on the Q&A chat. So I'm just going to start in with them with a question about how we manage conversations on social media from a brand perspective when people become overly negative and they cross the line of misinformation. And because they have a brand, they use the basis of free speech to protect their right to post it on social media. So I guess the question is too, that is there evidence to say what the prevalence of negative commentary is doing for others who may have a more moderate or positive opinion? Like, how does that impact them? Do we know? Tim?
Yeah, we do know. And it sounds like this person probably knows too. It's not great. So number one, there has been a lot of interesting research that show that social media, I often call social media the polarization machine. The discourse is polarized. So there's a study from MIT that I often refer to. It's almost a perfect U, where you have the extremes are the ones that get shared the most. The extremes are the ones that get the most attention. And the more extreme, the more is the case. And then the middle is kind of lost. The other thing that this can do is it can create the impression of false balance. And we've definitely seen that in the context of COVID, right? Where you have one extreme, and this extreme happens to be accurate. Okay, vaccines are amazing, like the single greatest achievement of biomedicine. They save millions of, that's all accurate. And then you just get the polarized view of that, right? And you lose perhaps the voices of those individuals that have reasonable questions, and they want to hear what's going on. So absolutely, the discourse is polarized, and that is harmful. And the other thing I'll say is there's also evidence that's been done in the context of both COVID. There was actually a study on COVID news and more broadly that shows that it is predominantly negative. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that could be the case. I referred to some of it already. It just performs better, right? It's almost like the marketplace of ideas, and the market says, be negative, be scary, fearmonger, that you're going to perform better if you do that. So yeah, unfortunately, both those things are correct, but I'm always hopeful, and I think we can respond to those forces in a constructive way that's not as negative. And voices like Andrew's can really help because they inject humor into the conversation.
So cancel culture has become such a significant feature of the chaotic social media movement. And what do you see as being the long-term impacts of cancel culture as it results to truth versus civility online? I think both of you could jump in on this one.
I dislike that term cancel culture because I always just thought it was consequences. Like there's just consequences to your actions. And so I'm seeing a lot of the use of the word cancel culture. People saying I dislike cancel culture. I don't quite truly understand it, but to me, it's like, it's the consequences of your actions, and in this day and age, all these tools and all these systems where we have conversations, it moves so much quicker than it ever has. So I don't know if there's a culture. I don't know if there's a culture of people looking to cancel people. I just think that's just part of it. But we're seeing it, like we're seeing in comedians. There's been comedians who have been canceled, and then all of them still have their career. So like they all still get to come back and do comedy. Louis C.K. is a great example, right? He's come back and he's done his career, and people defend him now because of this idea of cancel culture. They think that people are out to get him, right? So I that's kind of my take on it. I just think it's consequences.
I think it is a really fascinating question. And again, I said misinformation. Is the topic of our era, but I think this is another one that is, how do we deal with it? And the really good example, I think the most extreme example, of course, is Donald Trump being taken off, deplatformed, right? That is an extreme version of cancel culture. And let's, on the plus side, it seems to have worked, right? If you believe, the spread of misinformation. There was one study out of Cornell that found that he was one of the single greatest sources of misinformation about COVID. For example, and we're not even talking about voting. We're not even talking about, other forms of misinformation that have emanated from his mouth. So so in the aggregate, is it a good idea? So it works. The other thing is that it can give the social media platforms tools to use to fight misinformation. On the other side, there is concern that it's just going to further polarize the discourse. It's going to force them to other platforms that are even tighter echo chambers, and it's going to not allow this sort of, I'm a big advocate of freedom of speech. Now, I don't totally buy those other arguments, in part because this freedom of speech is arguments rolled out all the time. These are private actors. They can do what they want with their platforms. And I agree with Andrew. A lot of this is private actors responding, right? I do worry about freedom of expression. I do worry about how we have discussions on topics, because I do believe that there should be a plurality of views. But when they are, when you have a platform like Twitter saying you're coming off our platform short term, in the aggregate, I think it was a good move.
So, it really, we have, Andrew, you've talked about your kids, you've got 4 kids, Tim. I mean, one of the questions, there's a couple of questions about how we teach kids digital citizenship, and how do we teach them the concept of misinformation in the media so that they can become more responsible participants on social media platforms. What are you doing with your kids to help them?
Hopefully Tim has some answers, because I'm actually, this is actually something that like I'm not struggling with, but it's a constant thought in my head. And I'm hoping actually schools and curriculums actually come up to speed. If you watch the new Degrassi, Snake taught a digital media immersion class, and I was like, whoa! And I'm like, there's no way that's in schools. That's a pretend school. I hope they actually do teach that in real life school, because like my sons have those questions about, or my older son's been having questions about like Instagram, and he'll be like, oh, like you posted an Instagram photo, and like he'll have questions about it. I have a really open relationship with my sons. Like we're always talking about the world, and we're always talking about things he hears on the playground, and he just questions he has, and it's been uplifted more because he's at home. So I hope that just my role as an involved father will help transition him into this social media age. But it's changing, like it's changing so much, right? And so like even like 5 years ago, Vine, big thing, gone, doesn't exist anymore. TikTok is now a thing, right? But like that happened like so quickly. Everything is changing. It feels like months in between new social media platforms. What's the new one where it's just like people talking in rooms? It's just that's a new one I got invited to, and I've been listening on that one. So it's constantly changing. I hope schools and curriculums and educators have a role in this, and it's going to be on us as parents. It's really no different, though, in my mind, than teaching your child like right and wrong from just like being in the regular world, right? And so what we're teaching them about the digital world should kind of parallel what we teach them in like the real world. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. But Tim, man, as a dad, man, I don't know where I'm going with this.
How old are your kids?
6 and 3.
Oh, you can still break them. So you're you're in that delicate spot, right?
Yeah.
I think you nailed it. I think teaching them broad skills, Andrew, this idea of works in the real world works in the digital world. So I think we need to teach kids critical thinking skills. And this is going to sound extreme, Deborah, but I mean it. I think we start in kindergarten, teaching critical thinking skills, media literacy, and some Scandinavian countries are doing this. And I think we teach it throughout, elementary school, middle school, high school, and throughout university or what other education you do. And the good news is, always good news, is that it works. There have been numerous studies that have shown that this works. And Deborah, they've done studies with university students about, teaching them critical thinking. People think, oh, they're going to get critical thinking skills. Not always, right? Not always.
Not always, yep.
And teaching it to them, whatever discipline they're in, it does have an impact. We've done studies, for example, with university students showing how they're less likely to believe paranormal and more likely to tease out. And they've also done a lot of really interesting studies with quite young kids. There's one I always refer to that took place in Uganda, where they taught 11-year-old kids critical thinking skills in the context of health. And they were able to learn those skills and apply those skills, right? So I really think, sort of what Andrew's saying, give them the broad tools, right? The broad tools that are going to be relevant, whether you're talking about TikTok or Instagram or whatever the next one is, Hammer Slab or whatever it's going to be called. It's, give them the skills to be able to tease out what's real and what's not real.
And whose responsibility is it to moderate the public debate and discussions? And how do we turn the news back into news and not entertainment? And just to add to that, maybe just sort of default to celebrity, whether in the context of entertainment or sports, as figures of authority, even though they're often quite out of their depth.
Well, maybe I'll start with the celebrity. Yeah. I'm fascinated with that topic, as you guys know, hence my jade vagina egg. I can see it sitting right there. Celebrities, it's interesting. If we went outside and we asked, do you trust Tom Brady, the greatest quarterback of all time? Do you trust Gwyneth Paltrow? Most people, as a scientific authority, most people will say no, right? But research tells us that they have tremendous impact on our beliefs and on what we share online. And there's lots of evidence to back that up. So we have to recognize celebrities aren't going away, their platforms aren't going away, And so we have to be able to negotiate that. And ideally what you want to do is have people like Andrew, with constructive voices becoming part of the conversation, right? That's exactly what I think we need, what we want to have happen. And so that, that I think really is one step forward. Do you agree, Andrew?
Yeah, like that term celebrity is so weird to me, because like I think like we're mentioning like Tom Brady, like that's like another stratosphere of celebrity. But you mentioned it to me earlier, and I always cringe at that term when it's used on me, because one, I don't feel like a celebrity. I'm an actor, and I've had some success. But when I speak, I'm not speaking as Andrew Phung, television star. I don't want to speak that way. I want to speak as Andrew Phung, citizen. And so something that happened in the last provincial election was when I was, sharing some stuff, some articles that I was supporting. People were like, well, we don't want to hear what a celebrity has to think. And I wrote back and I'm like, I'm a born and raised Calgarian. I'm an Albertan. I built my entire career here. I'm a small business owner. I'm a father. I'm a homeowner in this city, in this province. Just because I act as a job doesn't devalue what I say. And just, I'm the same as you. But there's this idea here that because I'm on television, I'm speaking because I'm trying to entertain the masses and make them believe in what I'm saying. I'm just sharing information the way anyone else shares information. I'm hoping to cut through the noise. And I found that just by saying those things actually shut people up. That was a really cool thing. It would be like, oh, he's just speaking as an individual. I've been told before, it's like the LeBron James thing. I'm not comparing myself to LeBron James, but I've had people say, just shut up and just like focus on acting. Just stick to comedy, right? Don't step into this world. Then recently, I had a tweet that I had a tweet where I won an acting award. And someone commented, look at this guy sharing tweets that he won acting awards. Like, what a smug ass. And I'm like, I can't win. Like, I literally can't share stuff related to my field because I'm criticized. And when I share things as a citizen, I am criticized. So just from my point of view, I just share things as an individual now, and that I believe in. And I don't do it often. And I think that because I don't do it often, I feel like when I do share it, there is a bit more uptake because I'm kind of sharing things that I truly believe in and are getting behind. But going back to celebrities here, it seems like people dislike this idea of celebrity culture. So just tune it out, unfollow them. It's odd to me that people dislike these celebrities, but then follow them on social media. Why are these certain celebrities having like 100 million followers when you dislike them and you trash talk them all day long? Just move away from that. And I think I love this movement now, and I love this mentality of just like step away from social media. And I think this whole year in pandemic has really taught me that. Just like step away.
Tim?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have been following celebrity culture very closely and the impact that it has on our perceptions and beliefs. And there's a little bit of a, when I wrote the Gwyneth book, which I researched, 2014, the number one thing, Andrew, that the kids wanted to be when they grew up was a celebrity. It wasn't even an actor, a singer, a sports star, which were like, 2, 3, and 4. But a celebrity. And this was research done in the US and in the UK. And more recent research has seen a little bit of a drop in that desire. And I think it's partly because of exactly what you're saying, that the harm that celebrity culture can have, and people have been criticizing celebrity culture. So you're seeing a little bit of a drop. Having said that, I also think it's partly because they think they can be a celebrity other using other mechanisms. Like being a social media influencer is now viewed as a job, right? A job, which is like being famous for being famous, with no other really criteria to it. But it is fascinating to see that has shifted. But we can't, pop culture, as Andrew just said, like it or not, it has a huge impact on our beliefs, our behaviors, and on our public discourse. I'll say one more thing about that. Just to give you a sense in the context of COVID, there was a study from Oxford that came out early days in the pandemic, and it found that 20% of the misinformation that circulated about COVID came from a prominent individual. So it was a really clever study. They looked at the history of all the bits of misinformation, and 20% had as its source a prominent individual, but which is a lot to begin with, right? That's a lot to begin with. but 69% of what circulates on social media is us, the general public, sharing that 20%, right? So we can say we don't like celebrities and we can say that we shouldn't listen to them. They're having an impact. For example, the 5G myth, Woody Harrelson, thanks a lot for that, Woody, has a lot to do. He was one of the epicenters of that myth. And so it's important to understand the impact that they're having, and it's important to counter it in a constructive way.
So speaking of countering things in a constructive way, Donald Trump, who was also a source of misinformation and is now on trial for a second impeachment. How do we deal with conspiracy theories and QAnon type conspiracies? This is something that was demonstrated to be a threat to democracy in terms of what happened in Washington. It's very dangerous. And what is the best way to deal with these kinds of situations? And so, Tim, if you could start, and then I'll throw it to Andrew.
Go to Tim. Go to Tim. No.
I'm going to ask
I'm
you
inserting
about
that Michael Jackson meme GIF right now where he's eating the popcorn because I'm like,
right. No.
What?
We're going to get you to talk about humor and how you counteract that. But I want Tim to go first.
It's a massive issue, right? And what we need to do with conspiracy theories, and there's a lot of interesting research now emerging as to why people believe conspiracy theories. And I think that's very important. I think we need to listen to why people are attracted to those conspiracy theories. But first, we need to recognize if someone is a hardcore conspiracy theorist, it's very hard to change their minds, particularly if they have allowed that belief to become part of their ideological worldview. As soon as it becomes part of your personal brand, it becomes much more difficult to change the individual's mind. The second thing we need to do, and by the way, so anytime you hear conspiracy theorists, always remember it's the general public that's your audience when you're trying to counter it, right? You're not trying to speak to that individual. You can use that cultural moment as an excuse to talk about the conspiracy theory and about the evidence actually says, but you're not going to change that person's mind. The second thing you want to do is you want to get on it really quickly. And the 5G thing is a good example. There's a study published not that this year, obviously, looking at the 5G conspiracy theory. And their number one suggestion was, no matter how absurd the Bill Gates conspiracy theory, the 5G conspiracy theory, counter it quickly. And one of the reasons I personally think that's important is you want to counter it before it takes on that ideological spin, right? Before it becomes part of a package of ideas, a cluster of ideas that represent a particular demographic. So that's I think that is really important now. And I want to give you one really good example, then I'll segue over to you, Andrew. So here's a homegrown Canadian conspiracy theory. I don't know if people remember this. This was in October, so quite recent. And there's this conspiracy theory that the federal government was creating concentration camps. Did you guys hear this? Internment camps, as in order to force people to self-isolate. And I follow this. I kind of unpack the whole thing. And it started as a result of a completely logical, reasonable, good program to give people money to go to hotels if they don't have their own resources to self-isolate. One politician with a particular ideological leaning took hold of that, called it a concentration camp. That went to the conspiracy websites. That went to social media. You can just see it blossoming. And then you had some other politicians referring to it and legitimizing it further. So that's a good example of a conspiracy theory spreads. But again, the good news, all is about the good news. It also highlights how you can fight it. The Public Health Agency of Canada that day went on every platform and said, this is not true. Here's the reality. They went on Instagram, they went on Facebook, they went on Twitter. This is the truth. And now you see people talk about that program, no reference to the conspiracy theory. And so they do real harm, but we can fight it. And it may not feel like it, you guys, but evidence tells us that countering misinformation does work in the aggregate. We're talking about moving the needle here. This is going to be an ongoing battle, but it does work.
So Andrew, I mean, how can we use humor to challenge and sort of dampen these conspiracy theories? Not just, potentially on social media platforms, but also, let's say, with people that are within our own families or friends or friend groups, because they are they believe in that sort of conspiracy theory perspective on a certain issue. Where does humor fit in? Or have we forgotten the ability to laugh? And
Oh yeah, I think we laugh, but we're also crying alone in the shower. Like that's where we're
Mm.
at in the pandemic. Like that's kind of where we don't know how to feel our emotions. I really don't have an answer to it, and
Yeah.
I don't know what to say with it. I think, you know, in regards to those conspiracy theories, like for me, it's like just taking a step back and like logically walking through it, like logically looking at these
Yeah.
claims and looking at these theories and being like, okay, so they're saying this and this happens and this happens, so it's this, and it's like, yo, that doesn't make any sense. Like that isn't right. And so I think like that in itself is humor of just like calling it how ridiculous it is, how
Mhm.
this makes no sense. I think if you're having conversations with your family, I think it's like it's the same method of just like kind of pointing that out. My father made a comment saying he read a research where he was like, yeah, I heard smoking cures COVID. And I just stopped my dad. I'm like, dad. And I was like, Dad, what did we think of smoking in the 50s and 60s and 70s? Okay, so what do we know about it now?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just really think about that, right? And so he's like, yeah, you're right, son. And I was like, so it's like it's not necessarily humor, but it's just like logic. It's just like taking a step back and looking at it. And I think you know, the core of this question of why we're sitting here hasn't really been addressed, but I think you use humor to point out how ridiculous these things are. And I think you can use humor to point out when this doesn't make any sense. But I would avoid using humor when you're actually trying to listen and have a conversation with someone.
Mm.
Because I think the moment when you throw in humor, it actually looks like you're devaluing what the other person is saying. As a comedian, I know there is a time where I don't make a joke and I listen. There's a time where you allow the other person to speak, right? But you use the humor when you step away to like look at the situation to kind of like debunk it a little bit. And when time has passed, to kind of poke fun at what has happened. Like my favorite thing right now to make fun of is Nenshi and the Peace Bridge. That happened like 10 years ago. So I feel like enough time has passed to bring that up, right? And we have to allow time to pass for these things to come back up, because then it's funny. Sometimes when it's so new, it's not quite enough time has passed yet.
Yeah, it's too raw. I'm curious as to whether part of our challenge in terms of trying to counter the conspiracy theories is that there's an emotional attachment to whatever theory that is, and so that fact-based conversation doesn't work. So the question that's come up is like, what you know, where do you go? Because you're actually trying to likely address some strange emotional attachment to a conspiracy theory, and the facts aren't working.
The emotional attachment thing is a really interesting. I wrote a piece on this not that long ago. Actually, I'm happy to share it. It is a fascinating part of it, and it's something that's long been used to sell misinformation. And I have looked at it in the context of bogus wellness products. They often use, for example, emotion, or they use true issues. Like often people are attracted to conspiracy theories. I don't want to say often, but sometimes they're attracted to conspiracy theories because there is a completely justified grievance they may have. There's a completely justified problem with one of the actors, say Big Pharma. You know, they have not always been good actors, right? So they're a logical target of conspiracy theories. So I think it highlights how important it is to listen, as Andrew was just saying. I mean, that's a great place to land. It really is important to listen to get a sense of what is this emotional attachment, and can I fill in the narrative? Because what conspiracy theories do is they provide a narrative. They help make sense of the world. So if you're removing that narrative, removing that brick in their personal brand, their personal identity, you've got to fill it with something else that satisfies them. And so you can only do that if you listen and get a sense of what their values are, what their emotional attachment is, and respectfully give them a different narrative, but a narrative that is based on science.
So there was a lawyer who's passed away, Jim Palmer, said you have two ears for a reason. Use them to listen. So I want to thank both of you. We're almost out of time. I want to thank you both for your insight and your wit and your wisdom, and trying to help us decipher this very challenging place we are in as a society. And I want to thank the audience for the questions. There was no time to get through them all. I'm so sorry. Maybe we'll get both of you back another time to finish the questions off. That would be great. In the next day or so, you'll receive an email with links to view the session on demand and a survey requesting feedback on today's webinar, probably more time. You can find more about our webinar series at ucalgary.ca/community. And before passing the final word back to Dr. Barwani, I just want to thank him for his expertise and commitment and passion for this pluralism webinar series. Back to you, Dr. Barwani.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you to our incredible guest, Dr. Timothy Caulfield and Andrew Phung, our Chancellor and moderator, Deborah Yedlin, and our great team, past and present, Kristen, Rebecca, Marta, Vanessa, Sheila, Sarah, Caitlin, Kristen, and Melissa. Nothing happens without you. We look forward to seeing you again on April 13th for our 5th and final webinar in the Pluralism series, when we will welcome Meredith Preston McGee, Secretary General at the Global Center for Pluralism, and Dr. Melinda Smith, Professor and inaugural Vice Provost of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, when we will explore the relationship between pluralism and the concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion. By being here today, you will automatically receive an invite. Tell one friend to sign up. Post the link on social. My friends, see you in April.